First, thank you very much for this invitation. It's a very nice occasion to talk over very pressing issues, as it was, I would say, very evident in the first of the presentations today. For me, it's especially interesting because I had the opportunity to be here at a more local event that was related to a process of reinvention in which the urban center of Turin is involved, that has been focusing on many issues that I think to be absolutely pressing in contemporary urbanism. And these were all issues that, if I had to find a broad title, I would say they were all issues related to the challenge of contemporary urban public opinions, which is something that is deeply related to rules, as we have probably seen in the first presentation. And it is also, it's even more something deeply related to citizenship. So when Chiara gave me this title, City Making, which is a very trendy title, right? Because everybody now, we are talking about city making. We are all excited with the idea that there is, at this point, we like to think that in our cities there is a large cohort of people who are potential city makers, who are potential shapers of our own urban conditions. I decided to put this definition and to put it in a somehow negative perspective, trying to test it against some limitations that we see in our cities, and that make, in a way, this idea of city making an idea that risks to be a little too illuministic and a little too optimistic. And also reading the materials of your project, that is very, very interesting, especially in the perspective of its relationship with the Amsterdam Pact. I came with some a couple of reflections that I would like to share with you today. I would move from a concept that I always found very interesting, which is the concept of civic stratification. So if we give a look at our cities in Europe, and of course not just European cities, we can see very easily how citizenship cannot be represented as it used to be when our cities were ethnically homogeneous, were inhabited by just national natives. Especially in Italy, we have a history of recent immigration, so we are dealing just in the last 30 years about immigration. We cannot assume anymore, and of course this is a story, a longer-term story that deals also with metropolization processes. We cannot assume that everybody who is on the soil within the city is really part of the social and especially political community of the city. So with this concept of civic stratification, political scientists and sociologists have underscored the fact that if we give a look to urban society, we have to understand that nowadays citizenship, urban citizenship, is organized in layers. And we have to understand how each layer is defined by a very, very diverse bundle of rights and bundle of rights of access to certain political and social goods. Of course, this puts in perspective, and also it puts in a way in tension this very romantic idea that we have of localities and cities, meaning we have this romantic idea, which is also very democratic, that we have a territory, we have people living within a certain territory, and we give these people living within a certain territory all the rights and powers to self-govern themselves. We are in Europe, we are in Italy, and we have a centuries-old tradition of civic local administration institutions that was very much based on this, the idea that you could get rights from the place where you lived. And of course, this is more and more in tension with the fact that our places, beyond all the rhetoric that we had at the peak of globalization process about fluxes and so on, we know that our places are places in which much of the population is not really linked to the places in which they find themselves, but they are more transient. Maybe they don't want to be transient, but we want them to be transient. So again, we go back to this concept of civic stratification as a way to represent a way more chaotic situation in which citizenship rights do not coincide anymore with the specific territory. So the first challenge that I see is really to be aware of this and also to set up tools and to set up a narrative, a discourse, able to really build awareness in local public opinion about the reality of this civic stratification. I want to give you just an example with numbers, with very simple numbers. We had in Rome I live in Milan, but I spent a lot of time in Rome for professional reasons, and we had local elections in Rome a few months ago, basically, last summer 2016. And at that election, Rome is a city of roughly 2,900,000 inhabitants, and in that election, just 1,300,000 people would participate to the elections, down from 1,800,000 people who would participate to those elections just 20 years before, with roughly the same population. So the key question is, where did they go? I mean, we're talking of 500,000 inhabitants who basically decided to withdraw from the political process. So we know all the things that we discuss in Europe about the crisis of democratic institutions. But there is another story that I think is more interesting to us, which is the fact that within this 500,000 people who disappeared from the political process in Rome, there are 300,000 people who are migrants, who live in the city, who pay taxes, who are, fully part of the economy of the city, and they just do not have any right to participate to the political process. Actually, there is, among these 300,000 inhabitants, there are 130,000 inhabitants who are EU citizens, who are, thank God, able virtually to participate to local elections because they are EU citizens. But if we give a look to the turnout of EU citizens to local elections in Rome, we realize that it's less than 10%. The largest community in Rome is Romanians. They are 80,000 inhabitants. So we're talking of a mid-size European town. And just 8,000 Romanians went to local elections in Rome. So we're talking of a massive process of self-selection away from politics. So this is one first point that I would like to address. So we have more and more local institutions that are becoming somehow intimate situations from which larger and larger segments of the local society are excluded, but they are excluded in a very horrible way, meaning that they are not completely excluded. They are excluded as subjects, but they are not in any way excluded as objects of the local politics. Because as we know, more and more in our local debates, we constantly discuss about the condition of migrants, and especially migrants in cities. So they are absolutely center stage of our local political exchanges, but they are not agents in any way. And this very much puts a basic friction in the concept itself of city making. How can we do a city if a larger and larger part of its constituency is not able to exercise any kind of formal agency on the city itself? Beyond this formal issue that I see to be very pressing, especially if we talk about this in a European perspective, because as Europeans, we are major experimenters of civic stratification. We have been the protagonist of a very dramatic reframing of what is citizenship, something that we should be proud of, actually, by the way, instead of complaining all the time about the failures of our union. But besides this, I think that given the fact that European citizenship is by itself a factor of civic stratification, a conversation like this among European cities and among institutions that focus on city making should be very much at the center stage. Beyond this formal dimension, let's say formal dimension of citizenship, even if this definition is far to be precise, we see anyway how, thank God, besides these forms of formal exclusion, we see how there are, and I think this is very much related to the things that you were saying earlier, we see that there are insurgent forms of citizenship in our cities that very much go beyond these formal limitations. One thing that I would like to put in perspective here is the concept of a convivial city. In Paris, after the 2015, terroristic attacks, one of the interesting reactions was that given the fact that the attacks had been targeting very convivial, typically Parisian situations like people going out, people having drinks over the trottoir, at bars and so on, one of the reactions of Parisians was, let's go back to the streets, let's, in a way, show to the terrorists that our culture of urban conviviality is not being threatened by the terroristic threat that has hit us in such a horrible way. And I remember there was a call for let's go back to the sidewalks, let's go back to the bars, that was, embraced by many youngsters in Paris, and especially one day, a couple of days after the attacks. But interesting enough, on the local press, a very interesting debate developed in which some people would say, hey, yes, I'm very happy to go back to the terrace. I'm very happy to go back to the bars. But let's also understand, not because terrorists have been, not because terrorists have let us understand this. We don't care about terrorists, but let's understand if this practice of the urban space is really engaging everyone in the city. Let's understand if this conviviality that we perform more and more in the city is something that is somehow inclusive, somehow talking to everybody in the city. So given the fact that everybody here is probably really excited about the rediscovery of public life, or better, the rediscovery of life in public, which is not necessarily public life, as we know. The rediscovery of public spaces. In our cities, there are many conflicts about the fact that people are more and more spending time on public spaces. I think that this is one more strategic issue to be really reflected upon, which is how do we build a convivial city which is truly convivial? And to be truly convivial needs to build a specific kind of social capital that is very much in short availability in our cities, which is what sociologists define normally as the bridging social capital, which is the kind of social capital that bridges among social differences, cultural differences, and that basically creates more incentive towards a more equal, more inclusive city. So one issue, conviviality, how it can be more and more a real democratic quality of our city. And the second issue that I would like to discuss, this comes straight from an Indian thinker, which is, I think, fairly famous among urban practitioners, which is Appadurai, who has been writing about India, but he has been writing very much about democracy. And again, as Europeans, we should be interested in the fate of democracy, especially if it comes from the largest democracy on earth, which is India. So I find very interesting and promising the fact that we keep talking about post-truth. In Italy now, we talk all the time about post-verità, which is our version of post-truth, and we use this concept in order to stress the fact that more and more our public opinion is formed over facts that are not really sound, that are not really founded in empirical realities that we can discuss and that we can assess in some form of scientifically driven inquiry strategy. What I find interesting is that if we give a look to cities, of course we have our post-truths in public opinions in cities, but what we have the most is a form of limited, simplified truths that in a way limit our understanding to nurture public opinion. And Up at the Right came up with a very simple concept that I found very interesting, also in the perspective of an urban center, like the one in Torino and Bologna, the ones who have been participating, which is the right to research. So he has been discussing about the fact that one of the key components of urban citizenship must be the right for urban dwellers, any urban dwellers, citizens and non-citizens, to give themselves the capacity to research urban conditions and to really give themselves the ability to decipher complex urban issues. I was talking earlier before this talk with a colleague who talks about, who studies resilience, which is, I think, very much the proof that urban reality today is about complexity. And complexity requires that research becomes no more a profession, but becomes very much an attitude that we cultivate among our citizens. So the second issue that I would like to discuss is this: how city making needs to be more and more associated to a widespread ability of citizens to do research. Of course, we're not talking of standard scientific research, we're not talking of standard academic research, we are talking of cultivating the democratic practice of urban research. John Dewey, I think, would say. Thank you very much.